Hello, and welcome to Episode 5 of Sarastro's Star Wars Legion painting series. In this episode, we're going to paint the 74Z speeder bikes from Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars Legion. With a limited colour palette and fairly rough and weathered appearance, the speeder bikes are quite fun and fast miniatures to paint. Furthermore, you could use whatever your favourite technique for painting stormtroopers is on the biker scouts. Let's take a look at the painting stages. After assembly, I've chosen to prime the bikes in plain grey, and I'll be providing some heavy zenithal highlights to the scouts just as we did with the stormtroopers in the previous episode. We'll then paint the black sections of the biker scouts, followed with some optional highlights. Next we'll paint the speeder bikes using some simple base colours, a quick dry brush and some shade. We can then add a few optional highlights along with some weathering and some texture for the base. Let's begin. I'm going to begin by separating out the parts for the two bikes that come with the base game. I'm now using some superglue to assemble the bikes, working in no particular order. There's a relatively small point of contact for the steering vanes at the front. Once in position, I'm going to hold the part in place for around 20 seconds. When adding the second piece, we need to aim to keep it as symmetrical as possible relative to the first. I'm placing the foot pedals to one side for now, since we really need to wait for the riders before we can glue them into place. The last thing I'm going to stick on the bike for now is the bedroll, although this too could be painted separately and stuck on later if you wish. We can now go ahead and assemble the scout riders. I've chosen to leave the one free control arm off for now, just so I don't have to avoid hitting it with a dry brush later on. For the priming, I'm going to mount the bike to a piece of barbecue skewer for ease of handling. And I've chosen to prime all parts of the bike with Mechanicus Standard Grey, although black would also be fine. For the biker scouts, you could take a similar approach to that used for the stormtroopers in the previous episode, where we primed in pale grey, followed with some pure white from above. Except you may wish to start with a darker grey, such as Mechanicus Standard Grey, to achieve some deeper shadows in the recessed areas, notably beneath the visor of the helmet. Here you can see me applying the pure white on top of the Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm applying a second coat once the first has dried to ensure I've achieved maximum brightness. If you have an airbrush, you could achieve a little more contrast and smoother gradations by starting with a prime in black, followed with a broad application of grey, and finally some pure white. I wouldn't advise this approach with spray cans however, as the paint comes out a fair bit thicker, and applying 3 layers like this could obscure the detail. After also priming the bases in black, we're ready to begin painting. Just as with the stormtroopers, I'm going to begin by painting all of the areas of black with an equal mix of black and German grey. This means all the areas of black fabric, the goggles and mouthpiece, as well as the pistol. For what it's worth, I'm now going to shade the main areas of black with some Nuln Oil. We can then add some optional highlights to the white armour using Ulthuan Grey and white, neatening up any scrappy edges as we go. For the area just above the goggles, I'm mixing a slightly darker grey due to the shadow cast by the visor. And I'm using pure white for places like the top of the nose area, helmet and shoulders. Here I've realised the clasps on the straps should also be black. I'm now going to use some XV88 to paint the soles of the boots. And finally, I'm going to provide a few optional highlights to the areas of black using German Grey. Apart from some optional weathering and varnish, this completes the biker scouts, which means we can now turn our attention to the speeder bikes. For the main body of the bike, I'm going to mix quite a rich dark brown using roughly equal measures of Rhinox Hide and Mournfang Brown. I'm now going to create a roughly 3:2 mix of Zandri Dust and Elysian Green. Leaving this undiluted, I'm then using a size 6 flat brush to dry brush this over the bodywork. I'm first unloading most of the paint on some paper, then flicking the brush lightly across the surface of the miniature. I'm doing this firstly to help pick out the edges like you can see here. I'm also brushing this over the main front panel to introduce some colour variation and create a rougher, more noisy texture. We can now go ahead and paint the metalwork, and for that I'm mixing roughly equal measures of Leadbelcher and black. Using a moderately thin consistency will help the paint flow into all of these recesses. We can also use this for the control arms and foot pedals. Next, I'm using Stormvermin Fur for the bedroll. And finally, I'm using a mix of German grey and black for the seat. With the base colours complete, I'm now going to provide a simple shade to the entire vehicle, using an equal mix of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade. Once dry, we should have some nicely darkened recesses and a dull, weathered finish, and you could stop here if you like. Otherwise, join me now for some finishing touches. I'm going to begin by providing some optional highlights for the bedroll, starting with a reapplication of Stormvermin Fur. I'm going to leave the straps as they are to provide some contrast. I'm applying a second layer of this, and you can see that I'm pushing the pigments up to the central apex. I've chosen to lighten this further with the addition of some Karak Stone in a couple of stages. And I'm now using some pure Karak Stone for my brightest highlight. Next I'm going to mix roughly equal amounts of German Grey and Stormhost Silver. The first thing I'm going to do with this is provide some rough highlights for the metalwork. You can see I'm doing this pretty quickly, and I don't mind if things look a little rough and uneven. I'm now going to use the same colour to provide some edge highlights, chips and scratches to the bodywork. Here I'm hitting the edges with the side of the brush. And now I'm adding some thin scratches and scuffs. We could also use some Typhus Corrosion to add some subtle textured weathering to the lower part of the bike. This can also be used to tone down any scratches that appear too prominent. With the bikes complete, we can now glue the riders into place. and we can go ahead and attach the remaining control arm along with the foot pedals. Next I'm going to provide some weathering for the riders by sponging on some thinned Stormvermin Fur, just as I did with the Stormtroopers. I've chosen to apply a matte spray for protection now to avoid spraying the clear stand we'll be attaching in a moment. And I'm brushing some satin varnish onto the armour, although you could go full gloss if you like. I'm also applying this to the boots. We can then slot in the flight stand, which has a nice tight fit that doesn't necessarily require any glue. And I'm now gluing the stands to the base, taking care to ensure that the bike is pointing directly forwards towards one of the notches in the base. Just as with the ATRT, I'm now marking the firing arcs on the edge of the base before applying my basing paste. Once that's partially dried, we can mark in the firing arcs. And I'm going to colour and texture the base exactly as detailed in the previous episodes. Here's my Athonian Camoshade and Biel-Tan Green shade. I'm now applying some PVA glue, taking care to avoid the firing arcs, followed with various shades of grit and turf, which you can find detailed in the video description. I'm now adding various pieces of foliage, twig and bark. Finally, I'm going to tidy the rim of the base with some black, which I'm following with some brush-on matte varnish for protection. And this completes the speeder bikes. Thank you for watching. I do hope you have found the video useful. Feel free to ask me any questions you may have in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to reply. With the speeder bikes complete, we have just one figure remaining from the base game, who needs no introduction. So join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Star Wars Legion. Happy painting!